we move to the next agenda item on the way forward. Capacity building workshops are, of course, an integral part of the project, and now Dr. Niles and Dr. Zephyrine will speak on how these will be implemented during the project. Please.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, or all protocols observed. Thank you so much, Mariano. So welcome everyone once again to this consultation. I hope it has been insightful thus far. We're just gonna, as we wind down, we're just gonna take some time to outline where do we go from here, basically. You've heard Dr. Niles elaborate on the regional strategy. You've heard Dr. Legal elaborate on some of the materials and resources that we hope to use. And now it's how we're going to bring this all together. How are we going to deliver and implement some of these things? So the primary vehicle that we're going to use would be capacity building workshops, all right, for educational stakeholders. So we're talking about teachers, tutors in some instances, instructors, and so on, and the like. So just to give a quick overview of what we're going to do, we're going to start off with a little bit of a very short activity, and I'll share the link in fact, I'll share the link in the chat now. If you can just click on that, and this is just to give you a little something of you know, what to expect. Now, Dr. Legal, for example, may have briefly gone through the P's, purpose, and so on in her presentation. And it's just to jog your memory a little bit, all right? Even though it's not the actual workshop, we just decided to give you a little teaser. But so you just have to click on the link, it's in the chat. So just while you do that, and the screen will come up in a bit, you know, capacity building is one of the tenets of this entire project, because this is how we're going to bring everything that we've spoken about thus far. We're going to bring it together and really implement the training of teachers, educators, and so on across various educational subject fields that would ultimately lead to appropriation of IP principles in their subject areas. All right, and really the goal is to train or provide teachers or educators with the necessary skills and resources to impart knowledge and develop skills in their students as it pertains to IP principles across different subject areas. All right, so back to the little activity we have here. Let me just bring the page up. What are the 6 P's that were identified in the methodology? Even if you don't know, you can take a guess. There's no wrong answer. You can identify at least one, all right? And the results should show up here. All right, so you just click on the link, it's in the chat. And you don't have to put your name. You can skip that page. You can simply just go straight to the question and post a response. So even if you don't know, you can't remember any of the P's, you can make up something. You can, you know, post anything. Of course, you want to start with a P. So you can place it in the chat. What are the 5 P's or 6 P's, or you could place any one in the identified in methodology. Yeah. One of them was purpose, that's for sure. All right. And while you do that, we'll go on and I'll come back to that in a bit. So you can always type it in the chat and we'll take it from there. But definitely, and these things happen even with, you know, on the technological side. But that's perfectly fine. We'll roll with it. And we'll come back to it closer to the end of the presentation. So I want to hand over to Dr. Niles, who will delve a little bit into pedagogical strategies. Dr. Niles?
Thank you, Justin. And just change screen for me
sure.
when I ask. Thanks. So welcome again, everyone. And we want to start by looking at the strategies that we will be delivering in the training workshops that will help in the inclusion and integration of the IP curricula into existing system. So we're looking at modern training methodologies, and we're going to refer to these methodologies because they're training strategies and approaches that we adopt to enhance the training experience. So we're going to do that by improving engagement, by facilitating collaboration, allowing for experiential learning through a lot of hands-on experiences, and also infusing technology right through our training and presentation as a means of teaching teachers how they too can increase retention of knowledge transfer. Next slide, please. So what are some of these modern technologies that we'll be looking at? Well, game-based learning is one, and as you recall, Sharon did mention that quite a few games are included in the training materials provided by the EU IPO Observatory. So we will be building on those particular pieces of materials. Collaborative learning, self-learning. Problem-based learning is going to be critical because we've already heard from the presenters who talked about what the individual IPOs are doing in the pilot countries, how they are approaching it, and a lot of what they are already inculcating into the students is the idea of problem-based learning, which is one of the most important ways of getting children to, not only children, but students, to understand what they're learning, understand how they learn best, and also to take ownership of their learning. We will also be using space learning, the flipped approach, where the topic is actually prepared by the student and then delivered in the classroom. 3D modeling and virtual worlds, because using the sandbox is very, very important. And as we go into blockchain, that is also going to be important as we build out our creativity and innovation in our students. Next slide.
All right, thank you
and
so
I
much
hand
for
over to Dr. Zephyrine.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Niles. All right, so one of the things that we're gonna look at very briefly is something called active learning. And that's one of the approaches that we're gonna use throughout this, or we're proposing to use in this particular capacity building initiative. Now, what is active learning? Active learning is really just getting the learners or trainees or participants involved. So it's not going to be a talk fest or snooze fest, but you're actually going to be doing activities. So you would retain, it helps in retention. All right, it enhances the learning experience, the training experience, and it aids in retention, as we see here with the quote by Benjamin Franklin. And this has been well researched. So as you see at the upper end here, where we have 10 and 20%, you only remember 10 or 20% of what you hear or what you read, whereas you remember at least 70 to 90% of what you do. Yeah, what you do, what you say, what you write. So this is why an active learning approach or active training approach is proposed for this capacity building initiative. All right. And to this end, you may be involved, you may be required to build things, to create things, to, again, play games and so on. All right. Now, an active learning approach is or synonymous with a learner-centered approach or trainee-centered approach. And this is the approach that we hope to apply or implement in this capacity building initiative. And in turn, you can apply a similar approach when you are teaching your students or learners. All right. Now, one active learning approach is game-based learning. Now, you've heard game-based learning mentioned by Dr. Legol, Dr. Niles, but what is it? That was just in case you fell asleep. I just wanted to put that sound effect there. So, so game-based learning. Game-based learning is really the incorporation or integration of gaming principles with learning outcomes, tied to learning outcomes. So it's not just a regular game per se. So you may have heard of Super Mario Brothers, Tetris, Pac-Man, and whatnot. But the games that we are referring to are more educational, or the learning is the emphasis here, not so much the game. The game is the vehicle, but the learning is tantamount. Yeah. So that's what game-based learning is all about. And game-based learning provides a plethora of benefits. For example, remember I said earlier that active learning is very hands-on, very participatory. And so gaming or game-based learning is one of the most effective ways to do just that. Because of that, it helps it helps in retention. It increases retention. It increases engagement. It increases motivation. It is one way to make learning more fun or training more fun. So for these reasons, as we see here, as well as what I mentioned, for these reasons, we will be including or adopting a game-based approach, well, of course, as part of an active learning approach as well, in the capacity building workshops. Now, as I said before, in addition to engagement, increasing engagement and so on, game-based learning also facilitates cognitive development. So for example, it would help you to think through things in a particular way. Included in this is problem solving. All right, so not just for you, but even when you implement it or adopt such an approach when you are teaching your students. All right, it fosters creativity and even collaboration in some regards, which we'll get into in just a bit. Now, game-based learning is guided by three main principles, and I'm focusing a little bit on game-based learning because, of course, in light of what we've covered thus far. It allows for deep understanding, problem-based learning, as I mentioned before. And of course, it empowers your learners or your trainees or your students. Now, it empowers learners, and learners meaning participants, trainees, students, learners, you know. All right. How does it do that? The games allow you to become, let's say in some games, allows you to become a sort of character. It allows persons or players, let's call them players for now, or participants, to become an integral part or decision-making part or role that ultimately affects the way the game proceeds, the trajectory of the game. All right. So for example, your responses determine the outcome, what happens in the game. All right. Some games allow you to create a character or an avatar. All right. So all of these avenues allow for empowering of learners or trainees or participants, and also for engagement. In other words, you determine the outcome. So it's more of a, like I said, trainee-centered or student-centered approach. Problem-based learning, of course, a big part of any game is to solve a problem or to complete a task. That might be pleasantly frustrating. So you might try a couple times, fail a couple times until you get it right. But it's not as traumatic as a grand failure of things. It's not high stakes, all right? And of course, along the way, your brain develops from a neurological or brain scientific perspective. It helps to develop the cognitive processes I mentioned before, and that sort of thing, pathways and so on. Additionally, it helps to develop system thinking. And this is particularly important when, in these STEM fields, all right, or even in geography and some of these other scientific natural sciences, that where system thinking is more prevalent per se. All right, game-based learning facilitates these things because you have to think in a particular way, not just system thinking, but critical thinking, analysis, etc., etc. Now, game-based learning can be applied in different contexts. So you have, whether it's a face-to-face teaching or training event, blended or online, it can be done synchronously or asynchronously. So in other words, real time, as we're doing now, or it can be done asynchronously. So let's say if we were to give you a game after this session to complete, that is perfectly fine. And it also allows for collaboration. And at this time, I'll hand over to Dr. Niles, who will elaborate on the collaborative approaches. I was blending words there, Dr. Niles.
Yeah, blending. Yes. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. So what is this whole thing about collaborative learning? And let me just say that everything that we've spoken about so far of how we will deliver the training will have a very strong IP base to it. So we're not going to be doing this in isolation. Everything will have an IP basis, an IP example, an IP activity. But two heads are always better than one, except if they're on the same person. And therefore, collaborative learning is an educational approach that uses the idea of groups to enhance learning through working together. Speaking back to our World Cafe idea for the methodology of the strategy, where all heads will come together and come up with the best product possible. The same thing happens in collaborative learning. It is a form of social learning. And if you are into your learning theories, you will know that the social cognitive theory says that we always learn best together. And therefore, it is very distinctive in one respect. Individuals learn along with others, but not from an instructor or an expert. In fact, in this case, the instructor or expert becomes a member of the group because there's always continual exchange and transfer of knowledge occurring. Learners work with each other on projects where they must collaborate as a group to understand the concepts being presented to them. And there are different strategies that we can use for this collaborative learning. Once that strategy is the jigsaw strategy, we can also use the snowball strategy. So although it's called collaborative learning, there are quite a few strategies that we employ under collaborative learning to give teachers a wider menu of tools and techniques they can use to actually transfer the knowledge that they're going to be using to infuse the IP curriculum into their current curriculum. Next slide. Now, we always have this thing about what's collaborative and what's cooperative. Aren't they the same thing? Well, in cooperative learning, participants are responsible for a specific section of their own learning and a specific section of their own learning success. But they also are responsible to the group as a whole. But that group has a director. In collaborative learning, individuals participate, take responsibility for the entire team, for their success, for their roles and resources, and the organization of how that team relates and interacts with each other is left up to the group. So the group self-directs in collaborative learning, whereas in cooperative learning, the group is directed. People are given specific roles and they never change on you. But although we may use some techniques in cooperative learning, what we want to keep is the collaborative learning where we continually encourage learning from and with each other.
So where do we go from here? Or what does game-based learning look like? Well, I'm happy to remind you, I should say. We kind of covered that a little earlier, and I'll show you why, or how. So all the approaches we've spoken about thus far, an active learning approach, collaborative approach, game-based learning approach, these can all be combined to, and of course, they're all under the umbrella of training strategies or pedagogical strategies, but they can all be combined. And we have some examples which Dr. Legal mentioned earlier in detail. So we just listed them here. So we have the Inventor's Corner, we have logo making, we have playground games. Now, some of these can be applied or adapted even in an online context. So it's not just that it's restricted to face-to-face teaching and learning, yeah? So it can also be done online. And of course, in the capacity building workshops, of course, it's gonna be delivered. Some of these will be adapted for online delivery. So this is at the primary level, the primary school level, and of course, the secondary school level. So you might have, in addition to, instead of just a creativity diary, you might have a blog or a website where you can post or create different things that you can post things that you created, and whether you publish it or keep it private, it's up to you. And of course, that's speaking in the online environment. So there are different ways that you can adapt or appropriate some of these materials across different modes of delivery. And
I
that's one of
want
the
to
things.
add here, Justin,
Go ahead.
that there is an emphasis in the Caribbean right now on coding and
Yes.
building, and a lot of these, especially the trivia board game, can actually be adapted by coding. And because the students are actually being exposed to coding and robotics and forms of animation, that particular activity is a perfect example of how we can move it from the face-to-face world into the online world. And as they create, they also are creating and developing IP, which they can actually register and use. So that's one of the thoughts.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Exactly. And you know, as you said that, Dr. Niles, there are different tools that would even help in that regard. Even before you get to the coding and so on. There, for example, online brainstorming tools that would allow for mapping and, you know, brainstorming and really outlining projects and whether it's a coding project, creating a logo, for example, because it helps students or learners to adopt a more systematic approach. Yes, so there are different tools that can be used even in facilitating some of these tasks or to complement some of these tools. So all of that will be folded or incorporated in a logical way, of course. So we're not just gonna throw tools vicariously or arbitrarily, but they're gonna be appropriated not just for a Caribbean context, but also related to the subject matter. Yeah. And as we see here, some of the various subject areas that some of these tools can be applied to. And like I said, these are just examples. Yeah. To illustrate or make the point that some of these tools or aids can be incorporated and appropriated and applied in a seamless way. So using the same link I provided before, okay, good. So we have some votes. Most persons are looking forward to a hands-on or active learning approach. As you could see here, Dr. Niles, I guess that's the top winner here.
Yes,
I don't know if
is.
voting is still taking place. Many persons are looking, you know, we should have done this over and see if the perspectives have changed.
Yes.
You know, but for time's sake, I know we started a little, you know, so we're gonna wrap it up right there and leave it right there, sorry. And so we look forward to the next phase of this project. All right. Thank you so much. Mariana?
Thank you very much. We are actually looking forward to the same. And thanks for also making this last point very interactive from your side.